Maybe you've heard that the government of Canada is capping the number of international students it lets come here. And maybe this seems kind of strange to you. Don't we want people to come from around the world to study here? After all, international students add $22.3 billion to the economy every year. To put that in perspective, our net lumber trade only earns us around $17 billion per year. So we're talking about an important source of economic activity. And beyond that, many of them go on to work skilled jobs here, pay taxes, raise families, all good things. So why is the federal government now saying that we should cap how many international students we let in? To understand that, we need to first look at how our population is growing, because that's really the root of the issue. Let's start with this chart showing Canada's annual population growth going back to the 1940s. It makes it pretty clear that we've never seen anything like the population growth that we've experienced since 2020. Even before that, beginning around 2016, the population started growing faster than it had since the baby boom. So that brings us to the next question: why has the population started growing so quickly? This chart from economist Mike Moffat breaks down where Canada's population growth through the first 3 months of 2023 came from. Now, this is the latest data that we have, and what it shows is that only around a third of the more than 1 million people added to the population were permanent residents. 654,000 were non-permanent residents, which includes international students in addition to temporary workers. If you compare that to other periods in our history, the chart shows the same period averages from 2017 to 2022 and 1999 to 2016. You see how unusual that number is. The number of permanent residents added to the population has increased from the 1999 to 2016 period to now, but not by an enormous amount. But the number of non-permanent residents coming has grown by more than 1,000% between that same period. Now, the question is, what does any of this have to do with international students? If we look at the most recent Statistics Canada data on who makes up non-permanent residents in the country, we get a chart like this. What this shows is that 38% of non-permanent residents are on a study permit, and some also have a work permit at the same time. That's almost 1 million people. Back in 2021, that group was only around 560,000 people, so it's grown significantly. So what happened? Why did all of a sudden the number of international students coming to Canada explode? The answer has to do with funding for universities and colleges. This chart from Higher Education Strategy Associates shows funding for Canadian universities and colleges as a percentage of GDP since the 1950s, broken down by how much came from government, how much from student fees, and how much from other sources. And what we see is that while funding for universities and colleges is around all-time highs, beginning in the late 1970s, funding from governments began to decline. So universities and colleges made up the shortfall elsewhere, mainly tuition from students. But this problem is most acute in one province in particular, which is Ontario. And that's because Ontario not only provides the least government funding per student to post-secondary institutions of any province in the country on a per capita basis, it also stopped them from getting that money from tuition by cutting domestic student tuition by 10% and then freezing it, a freeze which is still in effect today. So how did colleges and universities responded? You guessed it. They started ramping up admissions of international students who pay much higher tuition on average than domestic students. And now, more than half of the international students in the country are in Ontario. In this chart, also from Higher Education Strategy Associates, you can see how the share of post-secondary funding from international students in Ontario grew from almost nothing in 2010 to account for nearly half of revenue this year. And if you narrow in on just colleges, excluding universities, things start to look even more extreme. Fully 70% of all international college students are enrolled in an Ontario college, and the tuition earned from students from India alone now exceeds the province's funding for colleges. These publicly funded colleges in Ontario are now heavily dependent on attracting international students just to keep the lights on. Around 36% of students at these colleges are now international. That's up from 8% in 2012-2013. And at some colleges, that share goes much higher. At Canadore College, 72% of students are international. At Northern College, 80% are international students. And at Lambton College, it's 82%. One college alone, Conestoga in Kitchener, accepted 31,000 international students in 2022. And it paid off. Conestoga posted an operating surplus, essentially a profit of $106 million last year. So there's your answer. If you want to know why the population of international students has boomed, that's why. Our colleges and universities, colleges in particular, are using them as a major new revenue stream. Some of them because they have to, and some of them, well, you tell me if you think it's reasonable for a college to have a profit of $106 million in a single year. I leave that judgment to you. So, what's the bigger picture problem with all of this? Why is the federal government now trying to crack down on this? The main reason is that everyone who comes here needs somewhere to live, and housing is already pretty scarce. So the growth of international students has also pushed rents way up, since international students tend to be renters. In fact, they have to be. They can't buy property. This chart, put together by BMO, shows how rents have changed with population since the 1980s. As our population growth increases, rents increase faster. And that big spike in the past couple of years hasn't been entirely driven by international students, but you can see from what we've just talked about that they are a significant source of growth. By the way, international students themselves, who often don't have much money to begin with, are some of the people most hurt by this. That's why you get stories of people like Chirag Gandhi, who is living under a bridge in Toronto while enrolled at Conestoga College, or Ashish Sharma, who is studying at George Brown and was living in a small house with 15 other people where he was sharing a mattress with another tenant. Or the dozens of stories of international students that are homeless that have popped up on social media, people living in makeshift tents in the suburbs of Toronto. So the federal government has decided that this is not a good situation for anyone, maybe with the exception of the universities and colleges, and is now getting around to doing something about it.